greatest time of the economic growth of all times.
Over $315 trillion of debt.
Yeah, I know. When your whole world is becoming divided into different economic centers.
The global economy is heading off a cliff.
Thriving.
A promoter of evil.
Yes.
As much as I don't want to say it, yes, we're going off a cliff. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Culture Clash podcast, where Russian and American consultants discuss and debate some of the hot news topics of this week. I'm Michael.
I'm Vlad. Hello, everyone.
And our four topics for today are, is the global economy heading off a cliff? Do U.S. elections actually change anything? The EU wants to fine Elon Musk, and is Dubai going to be the next global tech hub? Woo! So with that, I finally got it. So with that, Vlad, I'm going to ask you the first question. Are you ready?
Go ahead.
I see some papers here. So I see you did a lot of research this week.
I actually did.
You did?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes, I actually did, because I really love these topics.
Good. Okay, so you're ready for the first question?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, on their website posted an article from their October 2024 Global Financial Stability Report, highlighting that high economic uncertainty may threaten global financial stability. Is the global economy at risk of heading off a cliff?
Wow, great question. This is a great question because I think this is the most debatable question of all times. Like every time anybody starts to discuss world economy or financial stability or whatever, our media try to make it very grim, and everybody has a lot of different opinions. So I really like that IMF posted this, because I want to begin my response on that with actually also IMF data and IMF map. And I want this map to appear over here. I do it all the time. So I want this map to appear over here. And you can see that over the recent years, and especially if we look at this map, it's 2024, you can see that the overall growth is somewhere, GDP growth, I mean, it's around 3%. And there are different regions in the world where it varies between like 0 to 3 or 3 to 6 or even higher than 6% per year. And answering the question whether it's heading off a cliff, my personal opinion is not necessarily. And we cannot be just like with one sentence, we cannot say that, yes, it's definitely going off a cliff, because different regions, they develop differently. So you can see different powerhouses. You can see East Asia, Southeast Asia, Southern Asia showing amazing growth. Like, what was it? I think India is getting 6.8% of economic growth. Perfect. Like it's, 20% of world population. China has shown good figures as well. So all of the regions, they demonstrating growth, but to different extent. Then, yes, there are a lot of different risks. There are geopolitical risks, of course. I think we will cover some of them. There are risks of different shifts in world economy in terms of how the labor operates, because we have technological shift, which is investment from one hand. At the same time, there might be some threats to like regular labor. But at the same time, I would say if we look again at the recent, let's say 20 years, and you can see the chart over here showing the quite stable, slow but stable growth of world economy. So I wouldn't be that grim in saying that it's heading off a cliff. I would say it's balanced. Some of the regions, they're thriving. Some of the regions, they have bigger risks. So we can be more cautious over there.
So if you were to sum it up, your answer would be the economy is not heading off a cliff.
Not necessarily.
You're not concerned. Would that summarize your response?
Not necessarily. That's what I would say. I would say my response is balanced. So I wouldn't say it's thriving and we are experiencing the greatest time of the economic growth of all times. But I wouldn't be that grim saying that it's heading off a cliff.
Excellent. I'm so glad you said that, because I'm pretty grim. And I don't mean to be grim. I don't want to be, but when I went deeper into the data, that was the only response that I could really come up with. So with that, I'm going to throw a lot of data and figures at you, but just bear with me and follow along with sort of where I'm going with this. There's a couple of reasons why I think the global economy is heading off a cliff.
Okay.
Doesn't have to be right away. It doesn't have to be immediate. It doesn't have to be necessarily, as you said, the entire global economy. But by and large, I think the economic reality globally is going to be quite poor for the foreseeable future and possibly relatively soon. And the reasons for that are a few. One is extremely high debt levels. Another is higher interest rates that are likely to sort of sustain at where they're at, or maybe go a little bit lower, a little bit higher, but anyways higher than they've been for the last maybe, 15 years. Higher inflation, likely to be around with us for quite some time. Aging and the demographic concerns of how are we going to then deal with shifting workforce, shifting economics, all of that associated with the graying of the population, the declining population in some cases. And then finally, as you mentioned, is global turmoil. So when you sort of put all of these pieces together, I think the outlook is actually quite grim, to be honest. And again, not every region of the world is going to be impacted the same. I actually think the U.S. is particularly well positioned. I think places in the Middle East, I think, for example, where we live is pretty well positioned. But then I do think there's a lot of areas, probably the majority of areas, that are really high risk. So just to dive a little bit deeper, focusing on debt first, because again, if we look at these macro factors, debt, aging, interest rates, inflation, global turmoil, I think all of them summarize to abysmal, risky, bad situation. Let's look at global debt. In 2024, global public debt, so that's debt held by governments, is going to cross, take a guess as to how much global public debt is, global government debt.
I won't take the guess.
$100 trillion.
Okay.
$100 trillion. That's 93% of global GDP. It's the first time we're ever going to cross the $100 trillion mark. How we're ever going to pay that back, I have no idea. So take that, public debt, and now let's look at higher interest rates. So interest rates for most of, I think, our adult life have been pretty low. Maybe not for you in Russia, but for me in the US, and I think for most of the West, it's been low. So what we've seen is that interest rates right now in the US are at 5%. In the UK, they're at 5%. In the Eurozone, they're at 3.5%. In Japan, they're at 0.25%. And that's where things stand as of now. That's 50% of the global economy. For most of our adult lives, from about 2009 onwards until really 2022, 2023, interest rates in all those countries was at 0% for the majority of that time, for most of those years. So we're seeing a huge change in interest rates that are sustaining now for a couple of years after a period of extremely low interest rates. Now, take that with elevated levels of debt, very high levels of debt. That means a lot higher interest payments. That means a lot more cost. It's not a good mix. So now we go a little bit deeper. So governments have a ton of debt, right? We're saying over $100 trillion. If you go into private debt, so debt held by the public at large globally, and you add that with government debt, we're now at over $315 trillion of debt.
Yeah, I know public debt is growing, yeah.
So that's public debt plus private debt. So again, that's your housing, that's your businesses, that's individuals, that's everything. CNBC, so there's a columnist named Nessa Anwar at CNBC. She wrote that this latest global debt wave has been the biggest, fastest, and most wide-ranging rise in debt since World War II, which coincides with the COVID-19 pandemic. That's not a good thing. That's two macro factors. Factor 3, inflation. One 2022 article in The Economist cites the head of the Bank of International Settlements, Augustine Cartens, who says that we might be on the cusp of a historic change in the inflation trend. So from about 1980, you had globalization, you had supply-side economics, and most of the developed world, most of the Western economies, were seeing a sustained decrease in inflation after a very turbulent 60s and 70s. From the 80s up until really the pandemic, 2020, you saw a sustained decrease in inflation. Now, what he's saying is that we might be at the reverse of that trend. So if we're looking at high levels of debt, higher interest rates, higher inflation, all of that does not portend positivity for the global economy moving forward. So why do we expect inflation to stay high? Higher spending because people are getting older, because there's higher interest rates, which means you need to pay interest on the debt. So to give you an idea, the U.S. this year paid, I think it was about $850 billion in interest payments on the debt. $850 billion. That's more than we pay on defense. The entire defense budget, the largest defense budget in the world, the U.S. paid more on interest payments because of higher interest rates, paying for a huge debt pile. I think we're now at like $35 trillion. Okay, so that's one reason for higher inflation. Aging population. We're going to have fewer workers, less labor. That means labor costs go up, higher inflation. And then finally, deglobalization. So again, more tariffs, countries are competing. That's going to raise costs, going to raise inflation. Not good. So then finally we get to global turmoil. So all of these reasons to me are painting the pretty grim picture. I don't know when that's going to hit, but I think at some point we are going to have to deal with this. Global turmoil. The World Economic Forum conducted a survey of global banks in 2024, so this year, who said geopolitical tensions were their top concern. 83% of global banks said that, which is unique. Again, rarely has geopolitics been a top business concern in our lifetime, but now top global banks are saying that is the number one concern. They also cited that was for the next year. They said it was their top concern, 86%, over the next 10 years. So they're seeing this as a sustained risk moving forward. Okay, so that's, again, global turmoil. Why does global turmoil matter? Trade routes, tariffs, and energy. So let's go into energy. Let's just do each one real quick. Russia, 10% of global oil production, for example, fighting a major war in Europe. The Middle East, there's tensions with Iran, right? Iran produces 3% of global oil supply. 20% of global oil and gas supply goes through the Persian Gulf, which borders Iran. So again, these are areas of the world where if there's any concern, conflict, anything, global energy is a big risk. In 1973, OPEC embargoed the West, if you're aware of that, if anybody's sort of aware of that. But that was during one of the major wars in the Middle East. They cut off oil supplies to the West. It resulted in about a 7% decrease in the global oil supply, and it caused a huge global recession that, again, took a few years to get out of, caused, again, massive dislocation, big recession and everything. And again, we're talking about 20% of global oil and gas supplies, not 7%. So the ceiling of what could go wrong is much higher. Not saying it's going to go wrong, but again, the risk factors, I think, are tremendously escalated here. So then trade, and I'm going to try to be as quick as possible. China, Taiwan, and the U.S., massive tensions, right? CNBC cited an article from 2016. There's not all that much reliable data since then. 60% of maritime trade goes through Asia, 21% of global trade through the South China Sea. Where is Taiwan, China, and all of this issue? The South China Sea. Another huge risk to the global economy. 21% of the global economy. 21% of global trade, I should say, going through the South China Sea. Tariffs obviously raise a big risk. U.S. and global politicians want to raise tariffs, protect their industries, and all of that. So from my perspective, my conclusion is, as much as I don't want to say it, yes, we're going off a cliff. I don't know if everyone's going to go off the same cliff, if the cliffs are going to be of different heights, how bad it could be. But the point is, when you're building up all these risk factors, only one thing needs to go wrong for the whole what's it called when you you pull a card from the from whatever, the whole house of cards could come tumbling down with one thing going wrong, whether it's conflict, whether it's again, problems with debt, interest rates, inflation, all of that. So again, I think the U.S. is going to be probably better off than a lot of these countries because a lot of these risks it doesn't have. But I do think the global economy is looking at and staring down the barrel of a very dangerous time, a very complicated time, and probably nothing like what we've seen in our lifetimes. And I don't take pleasure in saying that. I don't want to say that. I wish it wasn't what the data is seemingly telling me. But that's what I'm seeing. So I don't know if either you're convinced by what I said or if you feel otherwise, or what's your response to that?
Okay, breathe, drink some water.
Yeah, I spoke a lot. Yeah.
Breathe, drink some water, relax, and let me cheer you up a little bit.
Okay, try.
Okay, so first of all, if I recall correctly from the economic theory, the rising inflation and all of this, it's not necessarily the worst thing for the world economy and for the economy in general. Because if I recall correctly, when you have very low inflation, it means your economy is not growing. It means your GDP is not growing. So the inflation should be balanced. And the constantly decreasing inflation, it might be actually the big problem for the country's growth. So again, if we look at this, I understand that inflation is an indicator of the prices will rise and the burden for consumers will grow and so on. But at the same time, it is the indicator of the growth. So I understand your concerns, and I understand that this shift in the inflation trend is concerning and might be concerning, but I think it's not that grim. Then I want to share one of the theories that I've recently came across, and I think it's very, very interesting, and it's very different from what the media in general share with us. So have you ever heard about the book called Factfulness? No. Okay. So there was a guy from Sweden. He was a doctor, one of the like leading volunteers from UN initiative Doctors, how we call it, Doctors Without Borders. Okay. This one, and he spent half of his life studying and researching the poverty. And he spent a lot of time in the very poor countries in different African regions where you can imagine the poorest people on earth.
Okay.
And he suggested to divide the overall income into 4 different buckets. So one bucket is when a person lives and gets less than $1 of income per day. The next bucket is between $1 and $4 per day. The next one is between 4 and 16, and the next one is between 16 and 64. Okay? I think we will, again, show this picture over here.
Okay. Where are you going with this exactly?
Yeah, exactly. So how many people do you think live in the first bucket with $1 per day?
No idea.
No idea. So today, there is 1 billion population, world population lives in this bucket. Mm-hmm. In the second bucket, for $4 per day, okay, we have 3 billion population. Then in the bucket of $16 per day, we have 2 billion. And 64, where majority of the northern, western, whatever world you call it, when majority lives, is another 1 billion population. Okay. 200 years ago, how many people do you think lived in the first bucket?
Okay, 95% of people.
Close, 85%. Okay. 85%.
So where are you going with this stat?
20 years ago, how many people do you think lived in the first bucket?
What is it now? What did we say? It's 1 billion. So what is that? 12.5%.
Now we said 1 billion. Yeah, it's
so
like
12.5%. So back then,
20
probably
years ago. 20
years ago, I'd say 25%.
50%.
50%.
50%.
Okay, great.
50%. So over the recent 20 years.
Can I tell you why that is?
Go ahead.
Globalization. Globalization, free trade, the perfect demographic situation where you had the largest class of young working population where people weren't having all that many kids, which at the time was okay because, again, you had all the supply of people working, all the money going right into the economy. But what I'm saying is that that trend is now reversing. So, again, deglobalization, to me, is one of the biggest risks to the global economy.
Deglobalization has been with us for the recent 15 years.
15 years?
15 years,
absolutely
yes.
Not.
Yes.
Wait, did you say 50 or 15?
15.
No, not
Globalization
really.
has been with us for recent 150. Really. And deglobalization has been with us for the recent 15 years. When they started all these regional agreements and all of this, these are the signs of deglobalization. When your whole world is becoming divided into different economic centers. So again, it's not that grim.
It is.
Even though you you don't have like the full scale like global like super tight economies of all the countries in the world. Your world is dividing into different regional economic centers, but they still cooperate. Like let's take Southeast Asia as an example. Okay, this is like one of the best examples of the regional economic cooperation.
Okay.
All the Southeast Asian countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and all of this. Of course, they're part of the global economy, but the main growth within and like all the consumer goods, they're growing within this region.
Sure.
They're part of the global economy. I'm not arguing with that, and they're part of the globalization. But at the same time, they focus also on the regional economic integration.
Sure, that's
the
fine.
same way as you see in European Union,
sure,
in different like even African economic community.
Sure. But that's a good thing. So again, whenever
that's what I'm saying.
No, but what I'm saying is that's all moving into reverse. So what I'm saying is, take 2016 for example. To me, that was the high moment of globalization. That was right before obviously Trump, who's a protectionist. That was before a lot of Europe started to go right. By the way, Biden has been a protectionist as well.
Yeah,
so
true.
American politics has moved right on trade, on tariffs, regardless of the president. And I'm not taking a position necessarily as to good, bad, right, wrong, but that's just what happened. So in 2016, one of the campaign issues at the time was the free trade agreement with Southeast Asia. There was the Asia-Pacific Partnership.
Yes, I remember. TPP. Trans-Pacific Partnership.
There we go. Thank you. TPP. That was one of the big campaign issues. Trump came out against it. Hillary said it was the gold standard of trade, whatever the case was. And that didn't go through.
Yeah.
It didn't go through because, again, the wave of globalization, the tide of internal politics around trade had turned. Ever since then, what have we seen? Tariffs between America and China, tariffs between the U.S. and the EU, trade barriers going up a lot of places. Renegotiating trade deals, the U.S. and South Korea did it. The U.S. and Japan did it. The U.S. renegotiated NAFTA, for example, a North American Free Trade Agreement. They then put through the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement. All of these things are more and more protectionist. So again, you can say what you said, and I agree with you. And that, to me, is the optimist argument, which is the global economy over time does outperform. Living standards get better, all of these things happen. I'm not disagreeing with that, because history would suggest for the last 200, 250 years, that's exactly reality. That does not mean, however, that there are not brutal 10, 15, 20-year periods within that. The Great Depression lasted, 10 years maybe? 10, 15 years? Caused a lot of harm along the way, a lot of trouble along the way. There was terrible periods during that period of time. The 1970s was an awful period of time for the global economy. So again, U.S. stock market dropped 50%. I think some European stock markets dropped 75%. You had the misery index, which is the combination of unemployment and inflation, had reached the highest level since the Great Depression, nearly hitting the same rate as the Great Depression. So 1970s was a brutal period of time, a brutal 10 years. You saw 2 energy crises, one in 1973, one in 1979. I'm saying I think that's what we're entering, which is going to be a brutal period of maybe it's 5, 10, 15 years. But I think if you add up all of these risk factors, again, totally agree with you. The long-term outlook is positive because, again, human ingenuity, we as human beings, we tend to persevere. We tend to grow the pot over time. The one difference this time around is populations are declining. Perhaps that could be offset with technology, with AI, all these things. I hope so. All I'm saying, though, is the near-term economy, to me, is scary. I think the risk factors are extremely high, and it doesn't mean that we succumb to what I'm saying. It doesn't mean you're going to have a major recession. It doesn't mean you're going to have a big depression. But what I'm saying is you can't look me in the eye, and I agree with everything you're saying. You can't look me in the eye and say highest debt levels of all time, interest rates at 20-plus year highs, inflation rates at, in some cases, in 2022, 40-plus year highs. The risk of global turmoil where every pocket of energy, for example, is in conflict, whether it's oil and gas in Russia, whether it's parts of Iran, whatever. You can't then tell me that all looks good and that's something that we should, that's positive. Is that not a huge... Are you not agreeing with me that these are all major risks that are probably the biggest risks we've seen definitely in our lifetime, but I would argue since the 1970s.
That's what I said in the very beginning. I haven't said that everything is super optimistic. I said I'm balanced. I said that there are risks, of course, but I'm not saying that we are heading off a cliff. I disagree with this particular sentence because I don't think that it's all black. And if you look again...
what's green? What's green? So if everything's not black, okay, I agree with you.
We still have the powerhouses. We still have the overall economic growth. We still have the countries showing the record high growth in their economy. We still have the increasing quality of life of people. And again, if you look at how overall world economy develops, it develops in cycles. And
sure.
Of course, like we will see different waves of ups and downs. But again, like when was the most recent one? I think like we can say it's COVID, or we can say it's 2008.
Yeah.
Again, and every time after this downturn, it goes up on the higher level. So if there is a next cliff upon us, I don't know, maybe. But I think, again, with all the technological advancement, with all the overall economic growth across the world, and with all these regional integration of different economic powerhouses, I think it's not that grim as you painted.
I think it's much. I think you're an optimist. I think you're a tech optimist. You're an economic optimist. No, this is scary stuff. These debt levels, combined with inflation, combined with interest rates, combined with critically deglobalization. Globalization solved a lot of the world's problems post-World War II to keep the peace, to increase prosperity. It helped to keep inflation low in the post-1970s period, from the 1980s onward, when your former country, the Soviet Union, collapsed, for example, and the Iron Curtain came down. You guys and the ex-Soviet countries and the former Eastern Bloc all integrated into the global economy. That was good for everybody. Everybody won in that arrangement. Now they're moving into reverse, combining that with these debt levels, with the risk, again, globally, of conflict, of energy supplies, all this other stuff. Again, you can say that, but to me, no, this is the scariest dynamic of the global economy in my opinion, since at least the 1970s, at least. It could be worse than that. Because even in the 1970s, with all the war and all the energy crises, you didn't have this level of debt. You didn't have this level of aging in the population, which is going to crimp future economic growth. I don't think this is good. I don't think this is good at all.
You have the aging population now, but I think in 1970s you had like, what, 30% less population in the world?
Sure.
So
no, but
overall workforce, of course, is growing anyway. I agree that aging is a problem. I don't think the deglobalization is that grim as you painted. Again,
if you say so.
Because I don't want to go into discussing the different agreements. I think like we can
say an advanced economics class.
No. I mean, we can save it for the next episodes. I think it's very interesting. But I think again. A lot of different agreements, the trade agreements and the economic partnerships that we used to have in the world, we still have. A lot of them are on papers, and like I think this TPP that you mentioned, it was more on paper rather than, and it has like big potential and everything, but nobody believed in this. Nobody believed it will ever happen. I read a lot of research about this. I will bring it for the next time.
Yeah,
nobody actually believed that this is ever going to happen because it's too massive. It's too massive, and because you included in this agreement, what you included? U.S., you included China.
No, China was excluded.
In the beginning, it was there.
Nobody wanted China in, so there was a geopolitical dynamic.
Here you go. Sure, so you included absolutely imbalanced countries. You included like initially you wanted to have U.S. and China as a to keep it balanced, right? Because like these two countries, they would benefit the most.
Yeah, but China was never part of that.
But then, let's check. Because then the problem of this TPP was that it was US and all the economies that are incomparable in sizes.
So like the Eurozone. So like the Eurozone.
In TPP, I think we're talking about different agreements.
No, we are talking about TPP. I agree with you, but I'm saying just like the Eurozone, economies that don't make any sense. That's what I'm saying.
But again, Eurozone, it has different... bigger economies balancing each other and benefiting from each other.
Okay.
I mean the founders, of course. Like
the founders, fine.
Here you go. The big five.
Sure.
Yeah. That's the thing. And the biggest problem with TPP, I think, like we're switching a little bit. Yeah,
exactly. We need
was in this imbalance. So again, to reiterate my point, it's not this. I don't believe it's that grim as you're trying to paint it, and as the media is trying to paint it. And I hope you're wrong.
Let me just very quickly, as you just did your conclusion, I'm going to very quickly give the last few points. $100 trillion of government debt, $315 trillion of total global debt, inflation, the highest level since the 1980s, back in 2022. Global turmoil, particularly in energy-producing regions. I'm concerned.
I think all of this will just saying us that in the upcoming years, we're going to see the reshaping of the financial and economic system in the world.
100%.
Absolutely. The same way like our parents and grandparents saw when the Bretton Woods system changed.
Which was in the 1970s, which exactly to my point, which ushered in that 10-year period that was brutal. That was in 1971. So you had 10 years, brutal inflation. Again, energy crises played a role, but that was a rough time to be... I don't want to say to be alive, but it was a rough time in the global economy. It was tough. Okay. It was tough. Multiple recessions, high inflation. I think that's my argument that we're heading towards something like that.
Okay. Let's get popcorn.
We'll see. I hope you're right. I don't want it to happen, but we'll see.
So the way I see it, over the recent weeks, both U.S. president candidates, Trump and Harris, they were showing their political agendas, and they're trying to show how completely different they are. And the moment one of them came to power, like everything will change. This is what they're saying. So my question to you is, are their agendas, is that different? And will it matter that much? Will it change that much as they paint?
Yes, it will. Again, I've encountered this a lot being an American expat. Nobody thinks it matters who the president is. Everybody says, oh, it's always the same. It's always the same. Yeah, if you don't live in the U.S., it does change in the U.S. In particular. I'll walk you through 5 areas where policy does change. And I do agree to an extent it doesn't change in all arenas. There are areas where policy is, again, largely similar. But walking you through the top 5 areas that I want to highlight: immigration, the judiciary, so the court system, culture, economic policy, and foreign policy. So I'll go very quickly through it. I don't want to do another lecture like I did in the last topic. Immigration. For Trump, for example, we all know where he stands in immigration. He's very hawkish on immigration, wants to limit particularly illegal immigration. What did he do as president? He built part of a wall for $15 billion, negotiated a policy called Remain in Mexico, which forced asylum seekers to remain in Mexico to process their asylum claims in the U.S. First time this happened. And then Mexico, even as part of that agreement, deployed 15,000 soldiers to the border with the U.S. to prevent people from migrants from coming across the border into the U.S. Okay, that's point one. And then again, he did a lot of things with H-1B visas, whatever. Anyways, the result of that was illegal border crossings in particular, and I want to go over numbers again because it's important. 2017, about 300,000 illegal migrants crossed over into the border.
Per year.
In 2017. So border encounters, illegal border encounters. 300,000 people in 2017. 2018, 400,000 people. 2019, 900,000 people. 2020, 400,000 people. Okay, so all under a million, most of those years under 500,000. Okay, Biden comes to office. So we say things don't change. Well, sometimes things change a lot. February of 2021, Biden eliminates the Remain in Mexico policy and says he also would not enforce something called Title 42, which was something that was an American policy to turn back unaccompanied minors at the border. So if you were a minor, you were under 18, you showed up without your parents or guardians, the Biden administration said, we won't turn you away. Instead, we will have you come into the country and we'll process your situation. Illegal border crossings under Joe Biden. 2021, 1.6 million. 2022, 2.2 million, an all-time high. 2023, 2 million. So I need to double check about 2022 being all-time high, but again, 1.6, 2.2, 2 million. Huge change, okay? Judiciary, Trump appointed 3 Supreme Court justices. That obviously had an impact because it overturned and it changed. There was a lot of rulings that were pretty, consequential, including, very importantly, Roe versus Wade, which I don't know if you've heard of. I'm sure probably quite a few people listening would have heard of. That was the 1973 ruling that guaranteed a woman's right to an abortion.
Yeah.
So that was overturned because Trump was able to appoint Supreme Court justices because he was the president. Obviously a huge policy shift. So the judiciary does matter. Culture. Trump banned transgender adults from the military, for example. He said he would work to remove transgender women from women's sports. He's talked about declaring healthcare providers that provide gender transition treatments to minors as being ineligible for federal funding. Huge cultural shift. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris wants to pass the Equality Act, which would add to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to prevent discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, etc. My point is, big distinction. On the economy, it is relatively similar. I actually do agree with you. Trump cut corporate tax rates. Fine. But the biggest area is around energy. So again, Trump deregulated oil and gas activity on public land. He signed a bunch of tariffs. Again, signed new trade deals, etc. But that being said, Biden hasn't opposed most of that agenda. He signed the CHIPS Act to boost manufacturing for chip research and things like that. The Inflation Reduction Act, which gave a bunch of money to green energy. But the biggest distinction there is on energy. So the Democrats and Biden like green energy. Trump, is not, he's not as into...
Doesn't care that much.
Yeah, he's more traditional energy. Fine. Foreign policy, again, some changes. Obama, for example, signed the Iran deal in 2015. Trump withdrew from the Iran deal and imposed sanctions in 2018. But, so that's one distinction. China, Trump was pretty hawkish, initiated all these tariffs. There was a trade war, etc. Biden kept most of those tariffs. When it comes to Russia, for example, Trump says he wants to be friendly with Russia, but in reality, he did provide lethal weaponry to the Ukrainians for the first time in 2019. So again, how big of a difference on foreign policy is it? That I would maybe agree. Things don't change all that much. So again, Abraham Accords, that was under Trump. Biden wants to expand that. So my only point here is domestically, inside the country, absolutely things change. And it's very important and consequential to Americans in the country. Foreign policy, however, when you're dealing with considerations and American strategic interests, I think that's something that both parties agree on more, and by and large always will, right? I mean, some of these things, whether it's the alliance network you have, whether it's core countries that are of vital interest, I don't think those things change that much. So when people criticize, oh, the elections don't matter, I think that's what they're referring to. But no, I think the elections definitely matter. Just it depends on the issue you're talking about.
Okay.
What's your take?
Interesting. I must say I partly agree with you.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to disagree.
No. I partly agree with you, and there are different reasons on that. So, first, I agree with you that mostly in foreign policy, most likely it won't change that easily and won't change that much because, yeah, I agree. There are alliances, network, and different governmental interests that have been there for ages, and you don't change them that easily, that much. So, for example, I hardly can believe in a situation where Trump comes to power and comes to the office, not to power, to the office, and
say both.
Okay, and says we are not interested in the Middle East anymore, or something like we're not interested in, I don't know, in supporting European security anymore, or something like that. He will claim some of this in different to different extent, but I think it won't change that much. So in this, I agree with you. I agree that also domestically, when of course like you have more leverages to play with your political system, it will change more. And also, I think there is another argument is if you like again the way I understand how it works. It will be the last term for Trump, and it will be the first term for Harris, potentially. So, if he comes to power, he will not be thinking about whether I'm going to be reelected or something like that. So he will feel more free in order to do whatever they want. That's what I think. I think like I read the research where they compared the terms of the presidents who served for 2 terms in a row or like combined in America, and the researchers always found that the second term were always more bolder from their actions perspective because they didn't care about being reelected. So again, I think that will add up that it might change. It might change. But then I was reading a very interesting article from The Economist. It's called The Trumpification of American Policy. And basically the guys, what they did is like they compared the announced agendas of both candidates, and they highlighted almost everything that you highlighted, but from different perspective. So the main take out of this, and I found it very interesting. I'm not sure it's like 100% true or not, but at least I find it very interesting. Is like Harris, she like most likely she will continue the Biden's course, but at the same time, they don't want to change a lot of changes that Trump made recently in his first term. And this, for example, comes to tariffs in relations to China. Like they will do it in a different way potentially, but the overall perspective and overall guideline remain the same. Like we will not ease the trade with China or something like that. So there will still be limitations. There will still be tariffs and all of this, and all the taxation. Like I think tariffs we call it.
Yep.
Yeah. So it remains. Then when it comes to immigration, there is a big difference. But like Trump is like super hard anti-immigration guy for everything, and as far as I understand, Biden was more like carrot and stick. We will let these immigrants to come, but we will try to like prevent some other immigrant groups from coming to the U.S. So trying to keep it more or less balanced. But I know the numbers that you just mentioned.
And that was illegal immigration, by the way, not legal immigration.
Yeah. Okay. Then another thing that where I found a very big difference in their agenda is when it comes to corporate taxation. Because as far as I understand, again, Trump's idea is to kind of lift a lot of tax burden from corporations, like to reduce the corporate taxes, while Biden and Harris, they just want to, on the contrary, increase it. This is a big difference, of course. This is a big difference. But again, I hardly can imagine the situation where Trump comes to power and say like, okay, now you have. What's the corporate tax like now? Around 21%? Okay, now we'll have 5 or like 5 or 15, something like that. Like I don't think it will be that radical even if it comes to power. While at the same time, when Harris come to the office, I don't believe that she will say like, now we're going to be 50%. Yeah, so it won't be very radical. So my take on this is the following: when they claim the agendas to be super different, it's not that different as it might seem from the media, because there is still some. How you say it? There is like they use each other legacy anyway when it comes to legislation. So I don't think it's like they flipping the coin completely. And again, I think you've heard it multiple times from different people from different regions. But I think the biggest difference of American political system versus many others, like from this region, or let's say from Russia or from other more autocratic regimes, political systems, is that one man's opinion is not that heavy as in the autocratic regimes. Sure. Yeah, so you have these checks and balances. So when you take the autocracy and one leader changes, comes to power instead of the other, then you have a radical change of the system. So when you have the checks and balances, yes, there will be changes, but not that radical.
Yeah, and again, I think broadly, I don't think we're really disagreeing on this. I think basically we're aligned. Again, I think internally the country changed a lot more than it does externally. The image shown within is much different than the image shown, I think, externally. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting what happens, and I think it's going to be particularly relevant for Americans living in the country. But again, for me as an expat, is my life going to change whatsoever? No, I would imagine not. But nonetheless, I think, again, considering how influential the U.S. is economically, militarily, et cetera, I think it's, of course, interesting, and we'll see what happens. Sorry.
All right.
So, Vlad, the EU has threatened to fine X as well as Elon Musk's other private businesses like Neuralink, SpaceX, et cetera, for failing to tackle illegal content and disinformation rules or following transparency rules, according to the EU. Is Elon a victim here? Is he being targeted, or is he out of line? What do you think?
That's a great question. That's a great question to discuss, because I think if we look again over the recent 20 years on the relations between the European Union, the Euro Commission, and all their intergovernmental bodies with the big tech companies, we can see a specific pattern in this behavior. So I wouldn't say it's like Musk out of line. I think it's not about Musk. I think it's about big tech in general. So a couple of numbers, as you like. Mm-hmm. Google was fined 4 times over the recent 5 years, combined for $7.8 billion by Euro Commission. Facebook, Meta, 3 fines in recent 3 years, $1.5 billion. Amazon, 3 fines, $800 million. Microsoft, 3 fines, $2 billion. Intel, 2 fines, $1 billion. In total, $15 billion from 15 big tech companies. I clearly can see the pattern over here, like they trying to be hawkish about this. And there are a couple of reasons for that. That's what I see. Like the first one, there are a couple of legislation areas in European Union that are considered to be intergovernmental, like purely intergovernmental. One of them is data protection, one of them is competition, and one like anti-monopoly and antitrust, anti-monopoly and competition, and data protection and like labor law. This is considered to be the intergovernmental policy. So it is defined on the EU level, not on the states level. That's why the fines are huge. That's why they tackle the big tech for the issue in any country in the European Union. So I can see the pattern over here. I don't think it's about Musk, and I think it's a pretty nice way for European Union to get some extra money, waving the flag with all the good reasons, protecting people's rights, information rights, competition, and all of this. So Is he out of line? No. Is he a victim? No. I think it's the pattern of behavior with all the big tech companies.
So you view it as more like a shakedown. So the EU has been going after some of these tech companies, maybe to raise money, maybe to sort of put them in place. Is that sort of what you would...
I think EU is pursuing their own agenda dealing with the tech companies, because I think it's not only the shakedown and the way to get extra money, but also it is the way to show them that EU is the legislative leader when it comes to competition, data protection, and all of this. And they try to present themselves as the front line, the headline of the legislation in these areas.
Okay, I understand. So I would disagree with you on that one. I think Elon is a victim, to be honest. I think he is being individually targeted. And this is the part, again, I agree with everything you're saying. I think the EU is, again, has historically been more pro-regulation, again, than the Americans, for example. I think when it comes to particularly American companies, there is a bit of a competition. I think that the Americans have with the Europeans regarding their own big tech companies, because I don't think Europe has similarly large and influential global tech companies.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think the Europeans at times will come down a bit harder on them than the Americans would, for example. And that being said, I was looking into a few of the quotes that have come out regarding Musk, a few of the sort of conversation points around what's going on. And I think what jumped out at me was not that they're fining X. So X is a private company owned by Musk, obviously. I would have assumed, okay, fine, you want to fine X. X was out of line, they did something wrong against the law, okay. They want to fine Elon Musk's entire private business portfolio. That I find a bit bizarre. So why do you incorporate SpaceX, Neuralink, and all these other companies? It seems like you're targeting him individually to fine him. They want to add up the revenue of all those companies and then fine as a proportion of the revenue of all of those businesses.
What are they actually trying to fine them for?
So what they said was that X has failed to tackle illegal content and disinformation rules. That's it. So it's an X problem. They're blaming Musk for the X problem, and because of that, for whatever reason, all of his other private businesses are included in the fine. So that's the part that jumps out at me and makes me think this is targeted. This is something very individual, very individually specific. And then if we go a little bit deeper, the EU Commission Vice President called Musk a promoter of evil. Which again, it's just like, all right, promoter of evil, and accused him of amplifying hatred. Promoter of evil, this is the guy who's the head of SpaceX. This guy's doing all these phenomenal things globally from a tech perspective, and he's now a promoter of evil. I mean, that's a bit extreme if you ask me. Coming from the same continent, and the EU Commission, which according to their own website says that everybody in the EU has a right that shall include freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impact information and ideas without interference by public authority and regardless of frontiers. This also means the freedom and pluralism of the media shall be respected. So with that, which is sort of the bedrock of the EU freedom of speech, to go after him for disinformation, so to speak, and then also go after all of his private businesses, I do view that. I think he's being targeted. I think it has something to do with whether it's his personal wealth, whether it's his outspoken political views, whether it's, I don't know, but I do think he seems to be being targeted.
Yeah, I have nothing to disagree with.
Okay, so you agree? It sounds.
I mean, yeah.
Again, calling him a promoter of evil. I've never heard like a senior leader of a.
I think actually, like, it just adds to the pattern that I described. Like,
yes.
if you combine what I described with this particular case, I think like the shakedown word is pretty interesting.
That's what it seems like. Either again, so I think he's a victim. I think he's being individually targeted. But again, given your data, it does seem like they are going after Western tech companies in particular, for whatever reason. But that's my view.
I actually left out a few as well.
Okay, so there was even more.
I picked the loudest one. I picked the most famous one. Interesting. What I find interesting is they claim to protect the competition. Like, because for example, what was Google fined for? Google was fined because the search engine was dominant in the market. Okay, like, give me the alternative.
Yep.
Then why Microsoft was fined for in the first time? Because they pre-installed Windows Media Player in their Windows operating system. Like, come on, like, again, look at any other companies, you find the same behavior. They do the same model. So why you target particular like Microsoft as a giant? So yeah, I think we agree on this.
Yeah.
There is a certain pattern over here, and yeah, it seems that he's been targeted.
It goes again. This is the last point I'll make, and then we got to wrap up this topic. But again, the rivalry between countries and economic blocs. I think this is one of the main areas of rivalry between the U.S. and the EU. Tech companies, they want to go after them a bit. All this money is being generated. All this money then flows back into the U.S. And I think the Europeans, at some level, again, shakedown could be one word for it, or however you want to call it. But it does seem unfair. It does seem like, in particular, he's being targeted. So yeah, it's an interesting situation.
Yeah. Last week we saw here in Dubai, we saw the big GITEX Expo trade show. GITEX is one of the largest technology expo trade show in the world. So my question to you is, do you think that the Middle East is becoming a new tech hub of the world?
It already is, and specifically Dubai. Dubai already is a global tech hub. I think it already is a huge leader. Again, I got a lot of notes and a lot of facts today. I'll throw out a few very quick ones. There's the DIFC Innovation Hub, the Dubai International Financial Center, already 1,000 innovation or tech firms. We hosted the expo in 2020. We've got the longest driverless metro line. All of our airports use facial recognition. The Dubai Chamber of Digital Economy in 2022 put out a roadmap to make Dubai the digital economy capital. To make Dubai the digital economy capital by 2030. They've done a number of things for that. I don't need to go into all the specifics, but whether it's making it easier to work remote from here, there's a specific work visa, remote work visa that they've created. They want to double the digital economy. In 2021, Dubai government became 100% paperless. They're already the blockchain capital of the world. Dubai's been doing, I think, a ton already in the tech space. So to answer your question, I think Dubai already is a tech hub. I actually think the Middle East will emerge as a tech region. I think there's other areas in the Middle East that will also catch up as part of the process. But to me, Dubai is already there. But what's your take?
In principle, I agree with you. I have other reasons why I think like that. But yeah, I think definitely Dubai and the wider region, it's emerging tech hub for sure. I wouldn't claim it as like the tech capital of the world yet. But it's going there. It's definitely emerging, and I can see a couple of reasons for that. The first one, yes, as you mentioned, we already have the great infrastructure for this, but there is a very wide 5G network over here. It's one of the highest internet speed across the world in here. One of the highest network speed in the world. Then another thing is the governmental vision. Because UAE and Saudi Arabia, they both see the technological advancement and the tech strategy as one of the key strategic pillars for their growth. Saudi Arabia is becoming the gaming industry center. UAE is also trying to become another gaming industry center. I think they plan to add 30,000 jobs in gaming only within the next 5 years. And yeah, there are a lot of infrastructure for startups. You mentioned Innovation Hub, great idea. And overall, just to see how stable this vision is, I was surprised because I think that this GITEX, for example, it's a pretty new thing. But then I was surprised when I heard that the first GITEX was here in 1981. So over the recent 40 years, they have been promoting the Dubai itself and the country to becoming the tech center in the world. Yeah. So yeah, I think we're aligned. There are different reasons over here, but it's definitely emerging. The only thing that I see is it's not the only emerging tech center in the world. There are competitors, but knowing that there is a vision infrastructure, knowing that there are resources for that, I think they will manage to overcome the challenges.
I think they will. And again, there's a few other points that I want to mention. So there was one around the, again, remote work. So Dubai is already the second leading global city for remote work. So I think all of it's related to a lot of the other strategic visions that the city and the country more broadly has. So again, if they set their mind to being a global tech leader or whatever sort of the agenda is, they'll get it. And I think it's for a variety of reasons. So again, they've made life here so comfortable and sort of it's a very easy place to live. So I think that's aiding in the work visas, for example, for remote work,
Right.
which is getting more people out here. Then they've got all the other initiatives. There was one that I thought was pretty interesting. So Dubai aims to become a global hub for crypto and digital assets, for example. They've already been called the blockchain capital of the world. In 2022, they launched a metaverse strategy. So they're really tackling all these different, not only overall tech, but also niche tech. So I think that multi-pronged approach, again, as we talked about with the tourism episode, when Dubai sets its mind to something, they're going to accomplish it, is my view. And I think they're already making strides. That's why I would say, for me, they already are a tech hub. The question becomes, how high do they go? Yeah. And does the rest of the Middle East also catch up? Which I do think they will. I think there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of talent in the Middle East. Whether it's startups, whether it's innovation, whether it's venture capital, a lot of money that's flowing around. And I think it's an exciting time to be in the region. And I think absolutely it already is, and it'll only get stronger.
Yeah, I can definitely see the metaphor of the region being as a tech startup. Because they have a lot of technologies, they have a lot of ideas, they have a strong vision, they're going there, but I think there is still some way to go. I mean, it's an emerging tech startup, so you are showing it to the world. You are showing your ideas, you are showing your projects, you complete them, but there are many more to come, and I think I agree. It's exciting time to be here and to observe it and with your own eyes and try it with the first hands.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay,
excellent. So I think that's it for today. So we agreed a bit, disagreed a few times. Well, at least it was less agreement than last week. I think we agreed maybe too much. Excellent. Well, thank you, Vlad, and thank you everybody for watching the episode today. Go ahead and subscribe on the YouTube page, and we'll see you guys next week.